Well, Aldrin, that certainly remains to be seen. That judgment that you speak of will be handed down at 10 o'clock this morning. Remember, this matter was brought on an urgent basis, as you correctly point out. So we were expecting the court to rule on that. So if she failed to convince this court, Aldrin, that the matter was not urgent or didn't meet the requirements for urgency, she will then have to go back and join the court roll queue. But what we heard, Aldrin, last week from the arguments is that Dr Nandipha Magudumana argues that her being brought back to South Africa was not a deportation, but a forced, disguised extradition, she says, and she claims there was what she described in her court papers as some kind of collusion between South Africa and their Tanzanian counterparts. Last week, Thursday, Dr Nandipha Magudumana's lawyers argued that deportation is what you would refer to as a unilateral act, Aldrin, or a singular act, but in this case, they say this so-called deportation falls in the terrain of an extradition. Advocate Anton Katz, SC, who was brought in to represent Magudumana, also disputing Home Affairs' version that Magudumana and Bester were basically handed over while they were on South African soil in Tanzania. He said that any insinuation that the premises of the High Commission in Tanzania is South African soil, that would be incorrect in international law. That's what he argued. The lawyers representing the South African Police Service as well as the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Stellenberg SC, on the other hand, Aldrin, saying that Dr Nandipha Magudumana has seemingly now changed her version. Her version, they say in court, is very different to what is contained in her founding papers, in which he says nowhere in those founding papers, Aldrin, does she speak of this disguised extradition that she now claims to have happened. Snellberg also basically urged the court to think about the alleged victims of Dr. Nandipha Magudumana in whatever decision it comes to in this court here this morning. Remember, Home Affairs also, Aldrin, had also joined the proceedings. Initially, they'd not been cited as respondents in Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's papers, you'd recall. Home Affairs having raised that as a concern, given that they were in the center or in charge of the deportation process. After Home Affairs then had basically joined the matter, the lawyer argued that while Dr. Nandipha Magudumana argues there had been some kind of collusion by these two countries, South Africa and Tanzania, Advocate Zitzman SC said there was nothing wrong with the two countries basically collaborating, and that basically does not constitute a collusion between the two countries. Then again, them contending that Tanzanian police had arrested Magudumana and not the South African Police Service had arrested her and Bester, and it's them that basically said the two should be escorted or deported back to South Africa. This, of course, to rebut what Magudumana had basically argued, what was the presence of that high-level delegation in Tanzania doing initially. We're not expecting, Aldrin, Dr. Nandipha Magudumana to be in a court here this morning when that decision is made public. My colleague, however, Kamogelo Siekoi, will be speaking to you on the show much later, because whatever decision this court does reach, remember that that prison where she is currently being detained is also one of the respondents in this matter. So my colleague Kamogelo Siekoi, whatever this court may decide, will have all the details from there, because remember, she says she's also being illegally detained at that prison due to the manner in which she was brought back to this country. So basically she wants all the charges against her to fall off, basically saying that there was not due process followed in bringing her back to South Africa.
And just a quick final one, Criselda, is we've seen now that the state has presented that deportation note, which indicated that when Dr. Nandipha Magudumana is deported from Tanzania, that there must be an escort. But do we know whether there's been any legal opinion that has been sought from the Tanzanian government about the processes that they followed?
Aldrin, that's certainly a very interesting point. As far as I'm concerned at this stage, that certainly doesn't seem to be the case, or at least I'm not aware if indeed there's any legal opinion that has been sought on the part of the Tanzanian authorities. You are indeed correct. I'd also seen those documents, that were received. Remember, once those papers have been filed inside court, it does become a public document. We've been able to peruse those as well. That deportation notice is there, and it is distinctly stated on there by escort. So at this particular point, in terms of what the Tanzanian authorities believe, whether they had also followed process, I'm not sure at this particular stage whether also legal opinion had been sought on that. But as far as South Africa contends, we're talking about the South African Police Service, we're talking about Home Affairs, is that everything according to them had been followed by the book. But let's see what the court decides at 10 o'clock.